Good morning, everyone. I am Martin Raspe. I work as an art historian in the Digital Humanities Lab at the Bibliotheca Hertziana in Rome, a German research institute for art history. My special field of interest is Italian art and architecture of the early modern period, and I wrote my dissertation on Francesco Borromini's system of architecture. My paper today presents the results of research I did more than 20 years ago, which has unfortunately not been published yet. The monument I would like to discuss today would have been a powerful prelude to Roman High Baroque architecture, a period that is distinguished by the world-famous works by Bernini, Borromini, Pietro da Cortona, and a few other architects. But it was never built. It has survived only in a set of drawings that are scattered over several collections. Fortunately, they convey a pretty clear idea of what it would have looked like. None of the drawings belongs to the original design process. All except one are copies after lost originals. The inventor of the building is unknown, and the purpose and dating of the project have been discussed since 1961, when Harald Keller presented the first of these drawings in an article. The drawings show a magnificent mausoleum church with a prominent cupola over a centralized ground plan that is represented in two slightly divergent copies. The plans reveal an extraordinary geometric structure that was created through the intersection of a square and a circle. The central rotunda is accompanied by four lateral spaces that form a Greek cross. The arms of the cross bulge out beyond the limits of the square. Their perimeter follows a larger circle with the same center. On the exterior, the three facades are ornamented with columns. In the four diagonal spaces between them, small chapels are installed that fill the corners of the square. Seen together, they suggest an X-like shape. The church was to be a freestanding monumental temple with a richly decorated exterior enhanced by four full columns on the ground floor. A series of 8 windows adorned with vigorously protruding volutes appears above the entablature, and a slightly pointed dome crowns the ensemble. The interior is rendered on the most appealing drawing of the set, a large suite in Munich that has always been attributed to Pietro da Cortona. It shows a perspectival view of the interior. The church is rendered as if we were looking into an architectural model that has been cut open. We look down upon the floor and up into the dome, while the exterior walls are shown in a cross-section with dotted surfaces. We can even see the sepulchral crypt underneath the slightly elevated church floor. The magnificent plastic articulation of the interior walls and vaults unfolds before our eyes. Mighty pairs of columns define the central rotunda. Instead of pendentives, like in the crossing of St. Peter's, the columns sustain vertical, windowed walls, which in turn bear the weight of the cylindrical drum of the dome. The building has almost no predecessor in Roman or Italian architecture. In the Renaissance period, some freestanding dome churches were erected in Italy, but none of them shows such a rich plasticity of the surfaces or a similarly inventive ground plan. Especially ingenious is the way in which a perfect rotunda is coupled with a Greek cross. In some respect, the project even harks back as far as Leonardo da Vinci's architectural inventions. The most pressing questions concern the author of the project, the localization, the dating, and its purpose. While the drawings give no indication about any of these questions, the last one seems easy to answer. It is a project for a papal burial church that was to be newly erected. From the ground plan, it seems clear that it was not designed as a big chapel in the context of another church, although both plans show a structure with 3 large rooms, presumably a pre-existing building to which the back of the church was to be attached. Both drawings show a minor passage into these annex rooms, while a main portal gives access to the church from the outside, with stairs leading up to it. The two plans differ as to its localization, to the left or opposite the neighboring structure. While it is undisputable that these drawings show a papal mausoleum, it is not clear which pope commissioned the project. Harald Keller identified the project as a first study for a reconstruction of the Church of Santi Luca e Martina on the Forum Romanum, the Church of the Roman artists, which also housed their guild, the Accademia di San Luca. Since this church was constructed by Pietro da Cortona under Pope Urban VIII Barberini, Keller argued that it was this pope who, at some early point in his pontificate, had planned to be buried here. In my opinion, it is highly unlikely that the Pope would have considered to be buried in a mere corporation church. There are no documents for such an intention, and there was no freestanding building similar to that shown in the plans. The question is complicated by the fact that the coat of arms shown above the papal tomb in the center of the Munich drawing are not easily identified with any of the popes who reigned in the first half of the 17th century. It shows a number of slanted strips in the upper section, separated by a horizontal line, and a fuzzy scribbled object in the lower field. While it seems obvious that the heraldic image bears no similarity to the three Barberini bees, the slanted lines correspond rather well with the arms of Gregory XV's Ludovisi. In recent times, some scholars have argued that the scribble looks like the Pamphili dove of Innocent X, while the upper part could mean the three lilies that would be appropriate for him. But again, none of the places this pope is considered for his funeral monument fit with our building. So we have to look for other clues that help us identify the pope in question and the destination of the project. One clue is given by the two figures of saints that are positioned in the niches on both sides of the papal tomb. A closer inspection of the two rather sketchy figures reveals that the one on the left seems to have a tight collar and holds a small crucifix in one hand, which can be clearly seen pointing towards the Pope. The figure on the right, in contrast, seems to carry some object diagonally in front of his body, the nature of which is not clearly discernible. There's only one saint that was popular in Rome in the 17th century whose attribute is a small crucifix. It must be the Jesuit Francis Xavier, whom Gregory XV canonized in 1622. The stiff collar also fits well with the Jesuit habit. For the identification of the other saint, one likely candidate is St. Andrew, who carries an axe-shaped cross as his typical attribute. While this identification is far from unassailable, the figure of St. Francis Xavier clearly points us to the Jesuits and to the pontificate of Gregory XV. Of all popes in the first half of the 17th century, Gregory certainly had the best relationships with the Jesuits. He was the first pope to be educated by Jesuits. He had studied at the Collegio Romano, and on March 12, 1622, he canonized the Jesuit founders Ignatius of Loyola and Francis Xavier. After Gregory's death, Cardinal Ludovico Ludovisi, his nephew, financed the construction of the Church of Sant'Ignazio at the Collegio Romano, the Jesuit church where Gregory was finally entombed, although his sepulchral monument was only executed a century later by Pierre Legros and others. In fact, there are archival sources from Gregory's pontificate that indicate that the Pope wanted to be buried near the Jesuits. The documents report that shortly after the canonization, Cardinal Ludovico was thinking of a suntuosissimo tempio, for which he wanted to spend 100,000 scudi and more, not yet at the Collegio Romano, but at the novitiate of the Jesuits on the Quirinal Hill. This planned building was to supersede the narrow and humid church on the premises Sant'Andrea a Montecavallo. It was to be dedicated to St. Francis Xavier. Only after Gregory's death, when the novitiate project had failed, Ludovico redirected the enormous finances towards the construction of St. Ignazio. So is it possible that our drawings represent the planned novitiate church known up to now only from the sources? Let us briefly have a look at the topography of the novitiate. In 1561, the Jesuits were donated a plot of land on top of the Quirinal Hill, bordering the Strada Pia that had only recently been laid out. Already a year later, they restored the old church of St. Andrew and established the novitiate. Gradually, the community expanded, but unfortunately, the area was small and cramped between two neighbors, the female order of Santa Chiara to its right, and to the left, the vineyard of the Florentine banker Pier Antonio Bandini, who had bought it in 1555. From the very start, the Jesuits had problems with their neighbors. The nuns had windows that looked onto their garden, and the same was true for the Casino Bandini, a small villa that Pier Antonio erected in 1587 next to the property line. To make matters worse, Bandini soon planned an extension to his villa, for which a whole series of impressive plans by Ottaviano Mascherino has been preserved. For a short time, the Jesuits considered abandoning the place. Fortunately, hardly anything of Mascherino's plans was realized because the Bandini Bank got into trouble. In 1569, Pier Antonio's son Ottavio became cardinal, and the situation relaxed when Clement VIII Aldobandini transferred the early Christian church of San Vitale, including its beautiful gardens, to the Jesuits. This way, they could enlarge their novitiate complex in 1605 with a lateral wing that fenced off the ensemble against the Casino Bandini. Only in 1622, the year of the Ludovisi church project, the cortile of the novitiate was complete. When Cardinal Bandini got wind of the Jesuits' decision to build a new church, he quickly raised the price from about 18,000 to 25,000 scudi. The negotiations were delayed, and when Gregory XV died in the summer of the following year, no progress had been made. This finished off the project because the new Pope, Urban VIII Barberini, forbade the construction of a dominant church building that could block the view from the papal residence across the street. Under Innocent X Pamphili, the Jesuits made another attempt, this time with money from Cardinal Ceva and a plan by Borromini. The Jesuits finally succeeded in buying the casino in 1649, but rebuilding the novitiate church started only in 1658 under Pope Alexander VII Chigi. The architect was now Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and the building was financed by another papal nephew, Prince Camillo Pamphili. I hope by now it has become clear that the annex building shown on the two maps must refer to the Casino Bandini that the Jesuits intended to buy and incorporate into their property. Indeed, when they finally bought the casino, they preserved and refurbished it. It is still standing today and contains the memorial rooms for St. Stanislaus Kostka. The new church of Sant'Andrea al Quirinale was erected in exactly the same position where the ill-fated Tempio Ludovisiano would have been built. When mapping the ground plan of the church onto the site, as known from the Mascherino maps as well as from Bernini's chirograph, it becomes clear how well the church would have fitted the available space. The slight shift of the casino's axis in relation to the Strada Pia was probably not yet known to the architects, as the Jesuits could hardly survey the Villa Bandini precisely in 1622. The two alternatives for the main portal make sense. One would have given access from the Strada Pia, the other from an existing avenue that led east in the direction of the Villa Ludovisi. The presence of St. Andrew's Cross is even more evident in our project than in Bernini's building. Presumably, just like today, the church would have been dedicated to St. Andrew as well as St. Francis Xavier. The new mausoleum in the novitiate would have dominated the city, visible from afar on the crest of the Quirinal Hill. It would have been the first sanctuary for the newly canonized St. Francis Xavier, and would have expressed the close ties of the Ludovisi Pope and his family with the Jesuits. After St. Peter's and the Gesù, another magnificent dome would have marked the skyline of Rome, joining the churches of the other post-Tridentine orders, the Theatines at Sant'Andrea della Valle and the Barnabites in San Carlo ai Catinari, that were under construction. If my considerations are correct, it is impossible that Pietro da Cortona was the inventor of our church design. A 24-year-old painter, he had neither experience as an architect that could qualify him for a papal mausoleum, nor had he any connections to the Ludovisi or the Jesuits. So, who could be the creator of the design? The old guard of architects that had worked for Paul V Borghese were mostly dead in 1622. Only Girolamo Rainaldi and Carlo Maderno remained. Both were certainly qualified, but neither of them ever produced a church design as artistically ambitious and imaginative as this one. It is simply not in their style. There's only one person who was capable of conceiving such a project in Rome at that time, the artist officially in charge of all projects by Gregory XV. I'm talking about Domenico Zampieri, called Domenichino, a painter of Bolognese origin as the Pope himself. Already as cardinal, Gregory had supported Domenichino, and on April 1st, 1621, he made him Architetto del Sacro Palazzo, the papal court architect. According to his biographer Baglione, Domenichino made vari disegni di fabbriche per città e per villa, impostigli dal cardinale Dulvisio e dagli intendenti giudicati molto buoni. Domenichino was not a master builder, but a painter. He was involved in all Ludovisi projects, although his share in the Villa Ludovisi, the Palazzo at Santi Apostoli, today Chigi Odescalchi, and the Quirinal Gardens is difficult to determine today. In 1626 he also made the first plans for Sant'Ignazio. After his death, the inventory of his legacy comprised Una pianta grande di Montecavallo, which may refer to our project, and 12 schizzi della cupola non messi in opera del Domenichini. Domenichino also knew the Casino Bandini, as Cardinal Bandini was one of his patrons. It is not just historical reasons that speak for Domenichino. Stylistical analysis too confirms his authorship. The abstract figure, composed of the square and the circle, is directly related to speculations about the ideal temple that were discussed by Neoplatonic circles at the Accademia di San Luca and around Ludovico Ludovisi's secretary Giovanni Battista Agucchi, a close friend of Domenichino. Nowhere in Pietro da Cortona's oeuvre do we find a similar plan, designed from the center, pushing radially outwards. Domenichino, however, played with idealized building types on one of his architectural drawings that are preserved. In a series of sketches from 1622, we find even closer parallels. A wall articulations very similar to the crossing of our project, and a group of 4 columns in a curved facade like on the outside. A drawing with sketches for Sant'Ignazio shows an exactly analogous structure of the crossing area, without pendentives, but with vertical wall segments. So what is Pietro da Cortona's role in this context? Why did he draw a perspectival view of Domenichino's church project? The comparison with the direct model for his drawing, an engraving from the book on Santa Maria Maggiore by De Angelis from 1621, gives the answer. It shows the Cappella Sistina, the papal mausoleum of Sixtus V, and it shows the same type of representation, the cut-open architectural model with cross-sections of the walls. Even the inclusion of the subterranean rooms is taken from here. In his early years, Pietro da Cortona became an expert in making preparatory drawings for prints. In my opinion, the spectacular Munich sheet is another example of his mastery in this field. Cortona, who had a close relationship to Domenichino, converted Domenichino's plans for a Ludovisi mausoleum into an impressive rendering to be reproduced in an equally spectacular engraving, to remember the project and the architect. So far, a corresponding engraving has not surfaced. We must assume that it remained a dream, just like the mausoleum church it depicted.